Scientists usually are testing hypotheses, and they develop those hypotheses by reading the literature, reading about what previous research has learned, and developing new ideas about what might explain those observations, or what new ideas they might have about the biology of the species. Our research process began by gathering information, basic information that would enable us to develop good hypotheses. One of the places to start with assessing the conservation status of a species is determining what its current distribution is and comparing that distribution to historical distribution. One of the first things I did was to document the current distribution of the species by digging into state and university archives for databases of occurrence records. Museum records are very important to help us understand the current distribution of a species, and started gathering that basic information on where they occur and how that may have changed from historical times. There's a lot of variation in the quality of those records, however. Some of them are very reliable, like a museum specimen, whereas others are much less reliable, like a sighting report. Somebody was out driving, a non-biologist, and they thought they saw a wolverine, so they reported it, and it ends up in a database. So we had to expand the records we use to include what we call documented records, which are first-hand accounts by trappers from the early days of wolverines they had captured and killed. And so these are trappers who were familiar with the animals, and they actually had the animal in hand. So we concluded that that was a reliable enough record to include in our database. We divided those records up into historical records, those collected before 1960, and current records, those collected within the last 10 years. These kind of records, you need time for these records to accumulate, so you can't look at current distribution just by looking at the records from the last year. You wouldn't have enough. So we had a 10-year time span to represent current distribution, and then a much broader range going all the way back in history to represent their historical distribution. So we then had what we thought was a reliable distribution map of the current distribution of wolverines and the historical distribution of wolverines. And on that historical distribution, which represents where wolverines once occurred, we overlaid a set of broad-scale habitat maps to see which of those lined up best with the occurrence records we collected. And we looked at vegetation conditions. We had a layer of alpine and subalpine habitat conditions. We had what's called the climatic life zones. And then we had areas of persistent spring snow cover. So a map showing the areas where snow persists into the spring. As far as we can tell, the most important habitat element to a wolverine are snowy areas. And because spring snow cover is a climatic variable, that means wolverines have a direct link to climatic conditions. And as climatic conditions change, they may be greatly affected by that. In other words, this research led us to further hypothesize that climate change could have a significant and detrimental effect on their populations. You can do much more sophisticated kinds of scientific analyses if you have data on individual animals rather than just, well, we know a wolverine was there at that time. Another very interesting thing about wolverines is they have patterns of white and cream-colored blazes on their throat and chest. These are called the throat and chest blazes. And they're these striking patterns, color patterns, and each one is different. And one of my colleagues has developed a technique called a run pole remote camera station, which is a structure we construct in the woods that is essentially a pole that sticks out from the bole of a tree, and the wolverine walks out to the end of that bole where there is a bait hanging above it. It looks up and reaches up to get that bait and exposes the throat and chest blaze while a camera on a nearby tree is taking its picture. So if we get good pictures of that throat and chest blaze, then we can individually identify wolverines in the field without catching them or marking them at all. And you can do much more sophisticated kinds of scientific analyses if you have data on individual animals rather than just, well, we know a wolverine was there at that time.
Visit the Natural Enquirer website for more information. There you can learn more about planning to test your own question.